Okay, we are live. So, good afternoon, Europe, and good morning, Canada. I am Marilena, and I, as a project coordinator, am very happy to welcome you to our fourth speaker series on the topic of education and social inclusion in the digital age. Before I give the word to our moderator for tonight, Ulfet, let me give you some information regarding the project and what we have been doing so far. To recap, the project Our Digital Futures AC is a project realized by three partners: the Goethe Institute Montreal, the Carrefour Jeunesse Emploi NDG in Canada, and Think Young in Europe. The project is financed by the European Union, and under this umbrella in 2019, we realized some on-site actions called the Thinkathons, but now due to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, we have shifted to a completely online concept. The aim of the project is to connect European and Canadian youth as well as policymakers in order to address the challenges and opportunities of the digital world. More specifically, to foster an exchange of views between young people on the key parameters to ensure that our digital future is inclusive, to enable them to jointly contribute to policymaking, and last but not least, to increase awareness and a broad public discussion initiation. As mentioned, this is the fourth and last speaker series where experts from Europe and Canada discuss on how to create and make a digital future which is more inclusive for young people, and every time we tackle a specific topic. Today's topic is about education and about the existing digital divide and about how to make sure that education, technology, and skills development opportunities are open and accessible to all. What best practices can we take from the EU and Canada and ensure that a digital inclusion in education is fostered? Furthermore, our speaker series takes place at the same time as the online Thinkathon Challenge number 2, where young adults create different policy recommendations. The deadline for submitting their recommendations is this Friday, and we are very much looking forward to receiving their ideas. And next week, on Friday, 22nd of January, we will have the grand finale where the 5 finalists will present their recommendations in front of jury in order to choose the winning recommendations. Make sure to note it in your calendars and not miss it. Last but not least, I would like to thank the EU for making this happen, our main sponsor, Agorize, as well as the rest of the recruitment and promotion partners that we have been working with in Europe and Canada. And now, without any further delay, I hand over to Ulfet Enver, who is our communications assistant at Think Young. Ulfet, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Marilena. Absolute pleasure to moderate tonight. So welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about what Marilena said in terms of how we can foster digital education for social inclusion. Now, the COVID-19 outbreak has repeatedly forced education institutions across the world to close overnight. The results have not been encouraging per se, but with the first wave of lockdowns exposing how unprepared schools were across Europe and Canada. No one could have foreseen the pandemic, but what is clear is that the education systems were unprepared. The education systems weren't always in urgent need of improvement even before the outbreak. The tackling the digital divide to make sure education, technology, and skills development opportunities are open to all and accessible is an immediate priority. Now, that's why today we're having this very vital discussion. We'll discuss the main issues surrounding digital education since the onset of the pandemic and how we can foster an inclusive digital education, again, in Europe and Canada. So everyone watching, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Please send in your questions on whatever platform you're watching from, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, and feel free to send comments or questions throughout the webinar. Now, today we have 4 very special guests with us, and I'm very happy to have them on board. So first and foremost, we have Maria Fritas, who is Senior Policy Advisor at Foundation for European Progressive Studies, which is also known as FEBS. Then we have Scott Young, who is our Head of Innovation at Alliance for Europe, and Grigory Dimitrov, who is currently Acting Head of Digital Education at the European Commission. And last but not least, we have today Marco Di Rossi, who is founder and CEO of WeSchool. Thank you very much all for joining us tonight. It's an absolute pleasure having you on board. First and foremost, I'm going to pose a question to Scott. Hello, Scott. First, I'm going to ask you, So many individuals across Europe and Canada still lack very basic digital skills. So the mismatch between the skills learned and those required by employers are still growing, even following COVID-19. So the lack of access to technology to those, especially in low-income households, is affecting their ability to learn remotely. It also affects their access to learning skills, which are so highly demanded in the 21st century. In your opinion, Scott, is Canada doing enough to foster digital education, and why? Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Alfred. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. Is Canada doing enough to foster inclusive digital education? As a Canadian, I really, really wish I could say yes, but there really is no way for me to do that. The answer, simply put, is no. Unfortunately, Canada is not doing enough to foster inclusive digital education. In response to this question, just some quick context may be helpful. Canada is a federal country, with education being the purview of each province and territory. So 10 provinces, 3 territories. And that the fact that you're not actually talking about one national strategy, you're actually talking at a minimum 13 across the K-12 spectrum, not to mention post-secondary education and adult education. There was a really great study done by the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in 2017, looking at the state of digital education in Canada. And the output from that study, really the kindest way to describe digital education in Canada is that it's a god-awful mess. Canada does not have a national digital education strategy, and the trickle-down consequences of that lack of leadership from the federal level is that you're left with provincial and territorial ministries of education, not to mention Indigenous communities, left to bootstrap their own digital education curriculum. And so the real tragic part here, the sad part, is that we know what the challenge is, that we want to boost digital education. We know what the solution could be, though the issue is quite complex and there's many facets to it. But without clear leadership from neither the Canadian government nor provincial governments, it's often left in the Canadian context, which I'm comfortable speaking to non-governmental and community organizations to fill those gaps. And there are a lot of them, and they're doing really great work, and they're working with marginalized communities, they're working with BIPOC communities, they're focused on Indigenous groups across the country, from coast to coast to coast. But that's a band-aid solution to what really should be a systemic challenge for Canada and Canadians, is that they want enhanced digital education opportunities for as many Canadians as possible. The knock-on consequences, the last thing I'll say is the knock-on consequences of that failure are obvious, which lack of education has negative adverse consequences for Canada's future innovation capacity, but also its future economic competitiveness. Before I turn it back to you, Alfred, the last thing I'll say is COVID-19 hasn't actually showed us anything new. There's nothing new about this failure of digital education. It's who is it affecting? It's disproportionately affecting the communities that have already faced challenges before the pandemic. This is Indigenous communities across the country. It's BIPOC groups. It's often people of color. That the pandemic has illustrated through the gaps in the gaps of remote learning, just how big that digital divide is. That is really quite embarrassing for what is deemed a relatively wealthy and well-off country to still not be able to fix that. So in response to your question, is Canada doing enough? Has Canada done enough to foster inclusive digital education? It's a hard no. That's not the answer I want to give, but it is what I would say is the truth of it.
Thank you so much, Scott, there. It's a shame to hear that Canada, in your opinion, is not fostering enough for the digital education system. So I want to move on to Maria here. Maria, back in 2018, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, who you work for, and Think Young produced the Millennial Dialogue paper, again, which you led, Maria, yourself. So you interviewed over 10,000 millennials across Europe, and it revealed that the majority felt that they were not being encouraged enough to participate in decision-making. Young voices here are essential in creating digitally inclusive education systems. So how do you think we can inspire and empower young people to raise their voices and to change their education systems? To you, Maria.
Thanks for that very pertinent and difficult question to answer, Ulfit. And hi, everybody back home joining us online. And thank you very much to Think Young, Cap pour Jeunesse, and the Goethe Institute for the kind invitation made to FEPS. I'm really, really excited to be here with all of you. And on the millennials, yeah, that was really a big adventure that FEPS undertook with Think Young. We made a survey, and we took that survey over 10 EU countries, and we inquired about millennials' aspirations towards European integration, and the direction of the European project. So it was definitely most exciting. And the reason for which we decided to pursue the study was exactly because we, the millennial generation, the generation born between 1918 and 2000, is always perceived with such a bad rap, right? Like we millennials being lazy, apathetic, not politically engaged. Yeah, digital natives and always hooked up on Facebook, right? And so it was actually these negative perceptions that boosted FEPS and Think Young to join forces and, you know, better understand why is there this perception is there. And you know what, Ulfit, I mean, also building a bit on what Scott has said, you know, that's the digital divide is there, and that's the COVID-19 crisis. Well, it didn't bring a novelty, let's say, but I'll add that it exacerbated, you know, this digital divide. And to reply to your question, I will tell you perhaps why the millennial generation is indeed the generation that is most suited, the better equipped to be involved in, you know, providing solutions and orientations for more digital equipped society. So, you know, we millennials, we got on our shoulders the consequences of the 2008 crisis. So we are a generation scarred by this crisis, and we will definitely be a generation scarred by the effects of the post-pandemic world. But you know what? We are a generation that is known for giddy up and being the generation that has the most level of education. So for instance, in our study, 4 out of 10 in Europe aged 25 to 35 have completed university studies. So the trend is even more pronounced among women. And millennials' education achievements are both a reflection of Europe's knowledge-based economy, but also a response to high unemployment. And we are also digital natives. Why? Because we grew up in the era of the internet, in the era of mobile phones, and we also transformed our lives as technology advanced, right? This transformed the way we communicate, the way we engage, and the millennial dialogue study, which, by the way, you can find in FEPS and Think Young websites, sheds some further lights into how we also politically engage as a generation. And so if you want, we are a generation that has the best studies, that faced with difficulties is the one that gathers together in solidarity. And in addition to this, the fact that we are in ourselves digital natives, that we have a greater facility to make use of everything that is related with technology is already a very good indication as to how this generation can then actively contribute. And I think that for Europe's policymakers, and here especially when we also have Georgie with us, which is great, we will be able to see also how the European Commission is looking into galvanizing, you know, this generation and bringing on board their ideas for, you know, the digital single market that the European Commission is developing. And so Europe, in terms of policies, is definitely making an effort to arrive there. But perhaps here, echoing a bit also the perspective of Scott, there's still a long way to go. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. As someone who's just missed the millennial cutoff and is a Gen Zer, I definitely agree with what you say, and hopefully more and more of the next generations can lead the essential change. So thank you very much, Maria. Georgi, I want to pose a question to you. So you were team leader of the European Commission's new Digital Education Act plan, which you adopted back in September. And here the European Commission highlights its vision for high quality, inclusive and accessible digital education in Europe. So how will this impact education in EU countries?
Thank you very much, Ulfet. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, and very pleased to be here. Let me start by saying that when we started to work on this Digital Education Action Plan, there was no COVID, and basically while we were thinking that we know what we are working on, COVID came in, and the first reaction that we had was that we really need to listen very, very closely to what is going on in the population at large, and also in particular in the education and training community. And we launched a very wide open public consultation back in June until September, which proved to be extremely popular in, let's say, European Commission parameters. We have collected input from more than 60 countries. We have received more than 200 position papers from a wide variety of institutions. And what was very, very peculiar is that we have received a very high rate of individual responses. And this is actually very unusual for anything that you do at the EU level, for good or for bad reasons, because we are sort of a little bit, just like Scott was saying, federal. We're not even federal. I'm not going to use that word, but we are a bit further up and maybe a bit far away. So what we saw there is very powerful signals, and maybe they are well known, but I just want to recall here a few numbers that were striking us. Basically, we found out, for example, that 60% of people have never experienced distance learning before. We found out that 60% of teachers also did not have any experience with online teaching. And here, basically, they were struggling with the workload, with the stress. Almost half of them reported this type of mental kind of also health issues. We saw that by and large, the infrastructure question has been really the critical challenge. Access to technology has been very, very important obstacle for many pupils. I mean, in particular, in our numbers here, it's around half of the pupils have such problems, and 1/3 of teachers. But what we also saw is, of course, the other part of the story, that those that were advanced, and here in particular, if you look at higher education, they tend to be more advanced. They were doing much, much better. And basically, this goes a long way to tell you that if you have done your homework in the past, then you would be likely to do better. Of course, one very strong and final point I want to mention here in the numbers is that basically more than 90% of the respondents told us that COVID is a turning point in terms of digital education, and more than half of the people basically said that they expect to apply this much more often. So what do you do with this type of things, with this type of input? When you are sitting at the European Commission in Brussels, a bit further away from the member states, you're not responsible for the national policy in education and training, just like in Canada, even though we have maybe even more countries, and provinces, because some of them are even federal. There are basically two things you can do. One is you can mobilize attention and political support. So you try to create a narrative. And the second thing is you try to mobilize investment. And this is what we have actually done with the Digital Education Action Plan. We have mobilized the attention and the political, if you like, narrative in order to explain that digital education is not really a big revolution. It's been there. There are proven ways of how you do this well. You need to look at the infrastructure connectivity side on the one angle, and on the digital skills and competences at the other. And basically, this is the two sides of the same coin. So this is a very important message that you need to sort of pass on to the political masters. And as a next step, then of course you need to put your money where your mouth is, and this is to mobilize the investment. And this is what is currently going on in Europe at I will use this keyword or buzzword, an unprecedented level, because you may have heard about the Generation EU package of the Commission, which has mobilized more than 650 billion euros. And I'm mentioning this figure only because 20% of this is meant to go in digital, and I expect this to be actually to a very large extent also going to digital education. So we are actually at a crisis point, which I think are probably going to turn into an opportunity. But as the previous speaker said, there is lots of things that you can do, and by mobilizing support and by mobilizing investment, you can create some change in Europe. What you need to do as well, of course, because we are in this federal, or let's say this system with subsidiarity, is that you need to make the member states also work closely together. And we are going to create a European digital education hub to do this and to support all the member states, plus to enhance cross-sectoral cooperation, because we believe that there are many things that you can learn from different sectors, from talking to also the young people, from basically looking to those that innovate in the system. By the way, let me finish with a small example. We have launched 2 years ago what we call the European Digital Hackathon, where we essentially invite pupils and students and teachers to develop solutions, and then we award those that are the most promising. So this is the type of thing that we are also doing to turn a little bit the focus into where actually the action is going on. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to see how the act progresses and the positive opportunities it will bring about. So now I want to ask Marco a question. Marco, so your company, WeSchool, was chosen by the Italian governments, well, one of the ones chosen by Italian governments, to bring the Italian school system into the digital age. It was designed for various online tools and to enhance what is already going on in face-to-face in classrooms. So how can systems like yours bring European and Canadian school systems into the digital age? Marco?
Yes, thank you for the invitation. We actually have been working for 4 years on trying to bring the Italian school system in the digital age. And that means, in our opinion, not having just lectures where students hear the lesson and then they have to fill some paper after 2 months, but really have students that are in the center of the process, that need to work in a cooperative way every day. They need to do stuff, to do things, to cooperate. And that really means change how the teachers teach. So that was the goal. We started as a startup 4 years ago, and this year we were the only Italian platform, together with Google and Microsoft, to be suggested to help the school system during the first lockdown. And how we managed to arrive here. Our focus is 100% focus on empowering teachers with new teaching methodologies, so on professional development for teachers. We are tech guys, of course, but we definitely think that the tech aspect is definitely overrated. It's all about the process. And what didn't work in 2020 was the teaching process. So what happened is that basically Italian teachers, but it was actually the same all over Europe, basically brought the same kind of lectures that they have been doing in the class online, which is the worst kind of usage that you could do of digital tools. And we as a system, we as WeSchool, we have tried to do that, but we as a system, we haven't helped enough teachers. So we talk a lot about inclusion, about students, but how about inclusion for teachers? Who is going to help teachers? We really need to empower them in reaching these goals. And we are trying to do that with an open approach, so working with all the publishers, with institutions, with the unions of teachers, to really manage to change how they teach and to switch the focus from something that we can touch. So, for example, our government has worked a lot on connectivity, on bandwidth, on infrastructure, on devices. And in the 20% of the cases, Italian students weren't able to access to homeschooling because of devices lack. But how about the ones that managed to get in the lesson, but basically have lost months of their life because they weren't paying attention at all at what the teachers were saying? So contents and teaching methodologies are something harder to change, because we need to change how people behave. But that's where we should start from, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Marco. I very appreciate your answer. So I want to go back to Scott here. And then you briefly mentioned there, Marco, about digital tech, not the importance of tech. So, Scott, tech corporations are supposed to have been said by many people that they should have more of an impact on the education systems in terms of donating computers, etc., etc. But I want to ask you, what roles should tech corporations have in developing inclusive education?
Well, what a question to ask this week. Thank you, Ulfut, and especially after Marco, especially after the week that we've all had, talking about tech companies, tech platforms, and what role they have. I think the first question that I think you're asking is should tech companies care about education? And very obviously, this is, yeah, absolutely they do. At the most transactional level, tech platforms rely on a digitally literate talent pool as their employees of the future. These are the people that they hire. These are the people that start companies that they acquire. And so I do understand that tech platforms, tech companies have a clear interest and incentive in having as many smart, tech-savvy people as possible. There's also a broader point here that having really robust digital education that's as inclusive as possible is not only just good for tech companies who are hiring, it's also good for countries, right? By now, it's almost an irrefutable fact that countries and economies with hordes of smart digital young people are the countries and economies that will remain competitive for the foreseeable future. That's not news. And if their populations aren't having enough kids, the smartest countries are actually the ones that are doing everything they possibly can to attract and retain the best and brightest global talent they can find. Really straightforwardly, immigration policy is innovation policy. But there is a broader conversation here that you're touching on, Ulfa, with your question about the interaction between government and tech companies. And this goes to the role that they should have. Personally, I think education at its core is a public good. I believe in public education. I went to public schools, and governments and are the ones who have the mandate, the responsibility to ensure that that public good is upheld. In that sense, though, I think there is a convergence here for governments and tech companies that are together, working together, seeking to bolster digital inclusive education. A few months ago, I mentioned them earlier, the Brookfield Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship conducted a digital literacy pilot. And based on that pilot, it came up with 2 recommendations for the future of digital literacy in the Canadian context, which is digital literacy, digital education is very important, but I'm simplifying here, so forgive me, Brookfield, but number one, it's you have to fund it. And there is a lot of money required to support digital education. And number 2, there need to be the skills that Marco was just talking about, the infrastructure, the backbone that you need to support robust digital education. That also requires investment. And we all know that tech companies have money. So I think there is an opportunity there, but because ultimately digital education is expensive, but it is also quite essential, as I made the point earlier. There is a but here, and for me, this is quite a big but. I really look to government and ministries of education and to rigorously ensure that we are, through digital education, fostering good citizens, not just good tech consumers. And I think that emphasis on citizenship is a really important one here. The open question here, and I don't have a good answer for this, is that do our elected officials and others in public service, do they have the expertise, the capacity, the jurisdiction, the political will to adequately govern these transnational global tech platforms? And I think that's where we're seeing some of that disconnect, because it gets into that challenge between what tools and what capacity and what opportunity do public servants have at their disposal, or even the expertise in-house to adequately provide the sandbox, if you will, for tech platforms to support digital education.
Some very interesting points raised there, Scott. Thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to move away a bit from tech corporations that we just did with Marco and Scott. But before that, I just want to quickly say to our audience, please keep sending in your questions, and our lovely experts will be more than happy to answer. But I'm going to completely change paths now and go to Maria and ask about university students. And Maria, you were not too long ago a university student, so I think you'll have some amazing insight into this. As you know, many university students face significant impact from the pandemic in regards to their future careers. And a lot of students are now feeling frustrated that the governments are not having, the government's not as involved, and they're not paying attention to the situations that they're in at this current point. So especially those who require face-to-face teaching, this is going to cause a lot of issues in their futures as well. So Maria, I want to hear your thoughts on this and what effects it will have in the university students in the long run, in the grand scheme of their careers.
Thank you very much, Ulfit, and also for making me feel young. I've actually exited university for quite some years now, but indeed, in my daily work at FEPS, interactions and discussions with young people, millennials and Gen Z alike, are a must. So to reply to your question, and also Georgie also mentioned this in his presentation, is also the effect that the pandemic is having on young people, not only in terms of their education but also in terms of their socialization. So for instance, in my own experience, university was already the first step to networking and connecting, etc. And nowadays university students and younger students are simply precluded from that due to healthcare concerns, of course. So I very much appreciated Scott's comments with regards to the role of government, in ensuring not only a swift transition, from a pre-pandemic education system to, I wouldn't say a fully fledged digital system, but at least a transition that would allow students to continue, their education, their courses. But as we come to understand, it's not that easy. We spoke about the role of tech companies, the relation of tech companies with government, and especially here with regards to Europe's position with regards to the tech giants. The discussion is still not very easy to take, right? Georgia was actually mentioning that's what was my initial point, is also with regards to the mental well-being of young people in these times. The millennial generation, yes, is a very connected and digitally driven generation, but as every young people, and this is I would even say not a characteristic of the millennial generation or Gen Z to socialize. This is simply human nature, even, I would say. And in a sense, I do hope that this doesn't have greater impacts in terms of the mental health of this generation, but on the contrary, with regards to future career prospects, I would say that this is an experience that will definitely mark us, but that we as a generation need to build on, and most importantly need to surpass. And here I perhaps can highlight the example of Portugal. This is where I'm connecting with everyone online from Lisbon, is the role of the Portuguese government and that of Prime Minister Antonio Costa in this transition to a digital education system and the management of the crisis. And here I would even say the progressive policy that drove the reaction to the pandemic context. For instance, here even Scott mentioned this in his first intervention, I believe. The digital divide is there. It's not every young person that has access to technology, to computer, to broadband. I believe other governments might have pursued this in Europe, but here the Portuguese government, to bridge that gap, made use of state television and engaged the most, let's say, creative and forward-looking teachers, to make the classes and present the themes of the year in public television, exactly to reach those areas and those young people that would not have the opportunity otherwise. So if you want, Ulfit, I would say I'm rather more hopeful and optimistic, that the younger generation will come out of this, together, stronger and more united.
I very much hope that too as well. Now we're talking about university students, but I want to talk about our educators here as well. I want to hear Marco's opinion on this, but I first want to hear Grigori's opinion here. So teachers and educators across Europe and Canada have hit a breaking point. So many educators are tempted to look either into strike action or switching careers, and their mental health has been very much detrimented because of COVID-19. So how can EU and its member states alleviate the pressures from and ensure that the needs of our educators are met? So Grigori, if you'd like to answer your question first.
Right. Thank you, Ulfed. So I think what we can do is to start by giving recognition and credit where recognition and credit are due. And I think that the teachers have been, if not at the very front line, then just right behind it. And in fact, mentally, probably very much on the front line and have experienced a great deal of what you just described yourself. I mean, in our conversations and in our data, we see that 90% of teachers have expressed the wish to further improve their digital skills in future. Of course, this is because there is a lot of stress and frustration with the lack of those, especially during the fast and swift transition, but also because there has been, homework that has probably not been done over time. And I think that here, what we need to think about is how to support teachers and educators in a very systematic way where we provide practical, pedagogical, and technical support at the same time. So we should not throw computers at those and then just leave them like that. But we should provide access to relevant tools, to content, to infrastructure. We should provide support for professional development. And we should also really stress the pedagogical expertise when you use this type of tools. And we should really go massive with this. So this should not be for the 5, innovative teachers in the school, but this should be like for pretty much everyone. So we need to think about how to support all kinds of institutions that have teachers and educators in a planned, in a action-based, and also in a purposeful manner. So there should be like a path, And I think that what we are proposing here with the action plan is a couple of examples and couple of specific actions where we want to do exactly that. I want to highlight 1 or 2 of those. First of all, we're launching for the very first time under Erasmus, which is a very well-known program in Europe. We are launching for the very first time digital transformation plans for any type of education institution, from schools to vocational education and training. Across the board, we want to support the institutions with development of a digital transformation plan, and if possible to implement this. Of course, I mean the funds would support part of it, but you need to get started in a systematic manner. We're also launching what we call an Erasmus Teacher Academy to support digital pedagogy and expertise in the use of digital tools, and including also access to assistive technologies and digital content. And also what we are developing is when we look forward to what comes next, things like AI and disinformation, which are currently basically, I mean, creating so much trouble. We really believe that there is a lot that education can do to solve the problem of, for example, disinformation, not just by regulating platforms and content away, because this is one way to do that, but we need to be also taking our responsibility to understand how these things are created, that some of these things are just done on an automatic basis. So these are type of things that we are promoting through the action plan. And I said we should give credit where credit is due. I think we should really encourage teachers and educators to go the extra mile now and to perhaps use this opportunity to also develop their skills. And I have mentioned in the previous intervention the Next Generation EU. Allow me to point again to the very massive opportunities for member states in particular when it comes to equipping of educators and teachers in terms of skilling, upskilling and reskilling. And the opportunities here are very, very significant, in particular for the hardest hit countries. So our urge is, of course, that everyone rallies their political constituents and they basically tell to the member states to use as much as possible of these funds, because they are also indispensable. So this would be my take on it, Ulfet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgi. Marco, I want to pose this question to you. So how can EU and its member states alleviate the pressures and ensure that the needs of our educators are met?
Well, I definitely agree on the fact that everything should start from social recognition. And then, well, I really think that it's all about incentives, and we should really connect professional development with the salaries with a really, well, meritocracy is definitely relevant. And we should pay more the teachers that use the advanced methodologies that I was mentioning before. Another relevant issue is that when you want to track and have KPIs, you need KPIs at an European level, and we don't have them now. We have KPIs on the outcomes, so about what students know. We have, well, what the OECD does, of course, and many other sources, but we can't answer to the question right now how many Spanish teachers are doing project-based learning, for example. And then this makes definitely more difficult to measure the quality of the supply of teaching that we are delivering at a continental level. So I think this, and I would like to add something on the tech platform discussion that Scott Young was mentioning. Something that I haven't said is that we have helped schools for free, because the government is paying for the bandwidth, for devices, for salaries of teachers. Parents are paying for textbooks, but nobody, at least in Italy, is paying for the platforms. So I don't think that public democracies, since education is a public good, can rely on the fact that private companies decide for different reasons to give a service for free. So we have lost much money last year to help Italian schools, and that's a choice. Our most relevant player in Italy, which delivers very strong products, is Google, of course. And Google is helping Europe schools to get on every day, because they want to have students that become workers and businessmen that rely on G Suite, as I do as a person. I really like what they do. And when Gmail isn't working, I can't really know what to look at. We can't rely as public democracy on this, because this is dumping on one side with the specific purpose to create behavior lock-in that in the digital age are very strict. So we need to face this topic. Platforms is something that we don't touch. We can't keep this in our end, but we need to, well, not we need, the citizens and the state need to pay for them anyway.
Thank you so much, Marco, for your input. Now we're going to have some lovely questions from our audience. So first we have Lula Lake. Thank you, Lula, for sending in your question. So is it possible that digital education could lead to wider inequalities in different countries if excluded comparatively better, given some countries may be fiscally more able to do so? So I'm going to pose this question to Scott. I'm going to put you on the spot there.
Thanks, Ulfet. Is it possible that a digital education could lead to wider inequalities in different countries if executed based on the financial capacity or the money required to support digital education? The short answer is yes, absolutely. I said earlier that digital education is expensive, but also essential. That digital divide that Maria and I were touching on could be exacerbated. I'll strengthen that and say is likely to be worsened if countries are not willing to put the investment required to ensure that their citizens and residents have proper digital education. Like those inequalities, you see them within countries. There's no reason we wouldn't expect to see them between countries, and that I think is a damn shame for all of us.
Thank you so much, Scott. So for our next question. Thank you, Afet Soyel, for your question. So within the UK, the change to home online learning has highlighted the social and economical differences within students from different ages, with many not having internet at home or laptops and computers to access their learning. So how can the government support schools and parents/students to bridge the gap and allow all students to access their learning as efficiently as possible? So I'm going to pose this question to Georgi, if you're happy to answer. Thank you, Marco.
Sure. So I think that what we see right now in some member states, very massive programs to equip the students, which or also teachers, but primarily students that do not have the proper equipment. And the way you do it, for example, is by buying large quantities of different devices. And then you can either distribute these directly. This is a more difficult road because you need to go through the social policy, or you can also work directly with the school. And then you essentially rely on the school being able to know which students are at a disadvantage. And then there are very different ways of how you can do that. You can either loan them, you can just grant them, you can do whatever you want. But essentially, you use the school as your hotspot through which you can distribute this type of equipment. When it comes to connectivity, lots of member states are now providing, not the member states themselves, but the telcos, the telecommunications provider, are providing basically subsidized tariffs to students, which would allow them to essentially use specific services and connectivity without charging them for the data, for example, if you use specific platforms or this type of thing. So there are ways that you can do this. One small sort of caveat, though, is that the problem in all of this is that the evidence of the last months shows that it really is very difficult to do it as fast as necessary. So here there is a lot that needs to be done on the side of the government's capability to deliver that in time. Thank you
so much. So we have a question from Jiwon Lee. So do you recommend educational institutions to continue with onlining after coronavirus? So we are looking forward to a hybrid learning method. So I will pose this question to Marco.
Well, definitely, yes. We have been working for years for schools which are opened. So what will happen to schools is what it has already happened in work. So the fact that we are in the office with our colleagues doesn't mean that we don't use computers or electronic devices. It simply means that we use them in a different way. So the digital part can basically add a new dimension where you can do things, collaborate, work with other people. So what we are embracing is exactly what we are already living in our personal life and work balance. So technology is everywhere. We only need to understand, and it's not easy, which is the best way to use them. And so definitely, yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Juan, as well, for the question. So we have a question from, sorry if I butcher your name, Erikania Fadkuva. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. Apologies. So what changes do you foresee in homeschooling and these primary educators, parents? So what challenges will they be facing, and what help should be provided to ensure inclusion? Now, as I'm going to pose this question to Maria, if you would like to answer this. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's all right. It's lively, and it's good to see that the chat, and the folks following online are, engaging with us. I mean, of course, it's a tricky question because it's not really my field of expertise, but I'll try to reply to Ekaterina, so I'll also try to pronounce your name correctly. I mean, the challenges of homeschooling were felt deep and wide, I would say, throughout the world for parents. Not that I have had the experience myself, but I did hear from colleagues of how challenging it was to actually be able to do your job and help out your children doing homework, etc., while still having to manage the chores, etc., etc. What I think it's important to let's say, highlight in this context is how the burden was shared in a very uneven way. So I would definitely recommend our lovely audience to have a look at FEP's website, because we actually launched as well a study in this sense, where we also showcased the disproportionate weight of the pandemic on women. And Ulfit, the question disappeared. I don't know if we can. Thank you very much. Thanks. The folks in the background are amazing. What challenges will they be facing, and what help should be provided to ensure inclusion? Well, here, of course, I would say that the role of local communities and of local politics. I would say that this would be my first answer, because with local communities you can find networks of support. With local communities, local government, let's say, I'm pretty sure that there have been possibilities of support, help, or financing in a given sense. So I hope or at least I tried to reply to a certain extent to Ekaterina's question. Thank you, Ulfit.
Thank you, Ekaterina, for the question, and thank you, Maria, for the answer. So we have time for some more questions. So we have one from Charles Howard. So what potential role will EdTech play in tackling social inclusion? So how does it also run the risk of exaggerating gaps based on the cost, access, and outreach? So I think maybe Marco might be best adapted to answering this question. Would you like to go ahead, Marco?
Yeah, as I was saying before, I think, are overrating the role that EdTech players, at least as we think EdTech players should be till now, can play in this game. Because I think it's all about how we support in many ways teachers and incentivize them to change, and also, of course, providing bandwidth and infrastructure. That is something that EdTech players don't do. Just to give you an example, we have been answering during spring to 5,000 tickets every day manually, and the kind of questions that we receive were often things like, what's an email address? How can I open an email address? So I'm not saying that EdTech players are not relevant. We need them, but at this moment, the kind of marginal impact that we have is definitely more relevant on what I was saying before, supporting teachers.
Thank you very much. One last question. So Nar Carrera Martinez, again, sorry if I butchered your name. If you have the power to do so, what would be the first implementation to ensure a digitally inclusive education system? What would you prioritize? So I would put this to Georgi, if you would like to answer.
Yes, full disclaimer that I know Nair. Thank you very much, Nair, for this question. What I would do is I would still go for the equipment and the infrastructure first, because I think that this is where you completely lose the people if you don't have them on board over many months. And then, of course, I would immediately invest in teachers.
Thank you very much. So as similar to what Nihar said, I want to pose one last question to all of our panelists. So I'm going to put everyone on the spot and give if I give all the speakers one last question to answer, and you have just only 60 seconds to answer it. So sorry to put you on the spot. So if you're in charge of education in the EU or in Canada, what's one thing you would implement to ensure a digitally inclusive education system? So I'm going to put the spotlight on Scott first. Scott?
Thanks, Ulfit. All right, I'm going to say this in the Canadian context, but there really is no reason whatsoever that this could not be applicable in Europe. Digital education is hard, social inclusion is hard, and I don't believe in silver bullets. But it is shocking, it is embarrassing to me as a Canadian that 16% of Canadian households do not have access to a broadband internet connection, and that number rises to 63% for Canadians in rural and remote regions. So if I was tasked with ensuring a digitally inclusive education system for the European Union or Canada, I would start by making sure that every single citizen had reliable, affordable internet access. Heck, if I'm making the rules, let's make it free, reliable access to the internet. That for me is the building block on which all the rest of this stands upon. Without that, then train as many teachers as you want, but if you don't have access to the internet, then these barriers, this digital divide is going to continue to persist. The last thing I'll say is that politics matter. Get involved. Don't be a passenger. Don't just watch, and don't be a consumer. If you care about digital education, join a campaign, sign a petition, fight for the future that you believe in, regardless of whether you're in Canada or Europe. This is your country. This is your digital education. Get involved.
Thank you so much, Scott, for your inspiring words. So Maria, so you've got one day and you can lead the EU or Canadian education system. So what implementations would you make? Only one.
Only one. Okay, so I'm putting my hat of European Commission President. I'm Maria Fritas, and my first mission would be actually, let's make this next generation EU budget for real.
Thank you very much, Maria. So Marco, you're in charge. What would you do?
I would incentivize different industries to work together. So we can't have a vertical approach, bandwidth, publishing. We really need to work together. We need platforms to be compatible with contents. We need platforms to work with internet connection. So we can't expect the system to do that autonomously. So we really have to incentivize and face all these topics that we have been mentioning in the last hour in a coherent way, and not in a separate way as we're doing now. So connection on one side, professional development on the other, and working together on this.
Thank you very much. Georgi, you already answered a very similar question. So do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with everyone?
Yes, I would like to share that my main concern is that while this COVID-19 crisis is accelerating a lot of the digitalization and creates a lot of winners, it creates also really a huge amount of losers and excluded people. And I'm really, really concerned about that, because that's not the fancy part of digital that we like to see. So what I would do there is something very similar to Scott. I would go for really creating a level playing field for everyone, so that everyone has the infrastructure and the connectivity, and then can at least compete, because otherwise it's difficult. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to all of our guests today. You've been all amazing and you've answered all your questions very well. Thank you so much to our audience for watching. We very much appreciate all the questions you brought in. Very sorry we couldn't answer all the questions today, but still feel free to answer bring in any of your questions, and hopefully our experts would love to answer another time. So again, thank you so much for joining, and you can happily watch us again on our Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever platform you choose to. The video will always be on for you to come back and watch. So thank you so much, and have a good evening, and have a good day, Scott. No, have a good day to Canada as well. It was good. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.